The lab fell silent the moment Amanda Pierce's hand closed around Michael Thompson's throat. For 3 years, the single father had endured her harassment at MedTech Solutions, the public humiliations, impossible deadlines, cruel remarks about his daughter Sophie. But when Amanda found the Bronze Star medal in his desk drawer, something shifted. "Playing war hero, are we?" she sneered, gripping his collar as colleagues watched in shock. Michael went perfectly still, not submission, but the dangerous quiet of a trained soldier calculating force and distance. What happened next took exactly 2 seconds and changed everything Amanda thought she knew about the quiet man she'd been tormenting. But that's a story for people who understand that the most dangerous storms gather in silence. Some storms don't announce themselves with thunder. They gather in the quiet spaces between heartbeats, in the careful distance a man keeps from his past, in the way surgical hands move through mourning rituals that have become sacred. Michael Thompson's alarm never sounded at 6:15 because he was already awake, standing by the small kitchen window of their Lakewood apartment, watching empty streets while his mind wrestled with memories that refused to stay buried. Sleep had become a luxury he'd lost somewhere between Afghanistan and single fatherhood, replaced by vigilance that never quite turned off. 2 slices of whole wheat bread went into the toaster, crusts removed because Sophie wouldn't eat them. The green cup came down from the cabinet, never the blue one, because routine was the foundation upon which his daughter's world stayed steady. At 8 years old, Sophie possessed an uncanny ability to sense the emotions her father tried to hide, her autism giving her supernatural perception for reading the emotional weather of adults. "Daddy's up early again," came her voice from the doorway, careful and knowing. "Just making sure everything's ready for my best girl," Michael replied, kneeling to smooth down the cowlick that never stayed in place. The Bronze Star medal sat hidden in his desk drawer at work, beneath quarterly reports and safety protocols. He'd earned it pulling 3 soldiers from a burning Humvee while his own shoulder was fractured and his hearing was gone in one ear. But that was Dr. Michael Thompson, combat medic, someone he'd known once but could no longer find in the mirror. At MedTech Solutions, Michael moved through his morning routine with precise efficiency. The laboratory was his sanctuary, where competence mattered more than conversation, where careful protocols created their own kind of order. He arrived 15 minutes early, prepared coffee for the team, and settled into comfortable anonymity among test tubes and data sheets. His colleagues respected his quiet competence without demanding explanations. They didn't know about the surgical training that made his hands so steady, or the military experience that made him unconsciously position himself near exits and catalogue potential threats in everyday objects. "Morning, Mike," Jessica Walsh called from across the lab, her young face brightening. At 25, she reminded him of the medical students he'd once mentored, back when Dr. Michael Thompson had been more than a memory. The morning proceeded with usual efficiency until clicking heels announced Amanda Pierce's arrival. She'd been a lab manager for 3 weeks and had already transformed what had once been a collaborative workspace into something resembling a surveillance state. Michael kept his head down as she made her rounds, but her footsteps approached his station with predatory intent. "Thompson." Amanda's voice cut through the lab's gentle hum like a blade. "I need to see your equipment logs from yesterday." Michael offered the forms with respectful distance he'd once used with superior officers who hadn't earned their rank through competence. Amanda's perfectly manicured fingers snatched the clipboard, scanning with the intensity of someone looking for ammunition rather than information. "This centrifuge calibration shows completion at 4:47, but protocol requires 15-minute stabilization. You logged completion too early." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Around them, the lab went quiet in the way spaces do when predators hunt. Everyone suddenly busy, eyes down, ears open. "The stabilization period was completed, ma'am. The timestamp reflects documentation completion, not process completion." Michael's voice remained level, giving no hint of calculations running through his mind. Distance to exits, witness positions. The way Amanda's stance suggested someone used to intimidation, but unfamiliar with actual confrontation. "Are you questioning my understanding of laboratory protocols?" Amanda's voice rose just enough for everyone to hear. Michael met her eyes with the steady gaze of someone who had faced actual threats in places where stakes were measured in lives rather than quarterly reviews. "No, ma'am. I'm explaining the documentation process as I understand it." The silence stretched like wire under tension. Something flickered in Amanda's expression. Uncertainty, perhaps, or recognition that she was dealing with something more complex than usual workplace dynamics. But the moment passed, replaced by cold calculation of someone who had built a career on establishing dominance through systematic destruction. "In the future, Thompson, I expect clearer documentation. Ambiguity suggests either incompetence or insubordination, and I have no tolerance for either." She turned to go, then paused. "Oh, and the next time you question my understanding, make sure you're prepared to back up your position with something more substantial than excuses." As Amanda's footsteps receded, the lab slowly returned to normal rhythm, but something had changed. Michael returned to his work, but in the back of his mind, a part that had never quite left the battlefield recognized incoming artillery. The war had found him again, dressed in corporate clothes and carrying a clipboard. 3 weeks into Amanda's systematic campaign, Michael's carefully constructed life began cracking under sustained assault. The harassment escalated methodically. Public corrections for imaginary mistakes, impossible deadlines, cruel remarks about his obvious inability to manage personal life. But it was the weekend shifts that cut deepest, forcing him to miss Sophie's therapy appointments for the first time in 3 years. "Why can't you come to my appointments anymore?" Sophie asked one evening, her dinner barely touched. The question came in the flat tone she used when her world had shifted beyond her ability to process change. Michael reached across their small kitchen table to take her hand. "Daddy's work schedule changed, sweetheart, but I promise I'll find a way to make it work." Sophie studied his face with intensity of someone who had learned to read emotional weather patterns for survival. "Are you sad about work?" The question hit like a physical blow, not because it was unexpected, but because it was so perceptive. "Sometimes work is hard," he admitted. "But you know what makes it better, coming home to you every day." Sophie smiled then, the first genuine expression he'd seen from her in days. But as he tucked her into bed that night, Michael felt familiar, stirring of something he'd hoped never to feel again, the cold, calculating rage of a soldier preparing for war. The harassment escalated systematically over following weeks. Amanda found fault with every aspect of Michael's work, manufacturing crises and documenting each invented infraction with meticulous attention. She reassigned him to menial tasks, stripping away responsibilities that had given his work meaning. But the personal attacks cut deepest. Casual references to his inability to manage personal life. Knowing looks when he left precisely at closing time. The way she turned his dedication to Sophie into evidence of professional inadequacy. "Ozzy, single fathers face unique challenges maintaining professional commitment," she said during one brutal performance review, words carefully chosen to sound sympathetic while delivering maximum damage. "Perhaps you should consider whether your circumstances allow you to give this position the attention it deserves." Michael sat across from her, hands clasped to hide their trembling, not from fear, but from enormous effort required to maintain control. The Bronze Star felt heavy in his desk drawer, reminder of the man once trusted with life and death decisions under enemy fire. The breaking point came on a Friday afternoon when Amanda decided to conduct surprise inspection during the monthly safety meeting. 20 people gathered in the main workspace as she moved through his station like a detective at a crime scene. "Thompson, your chemical inventory shows a discrepancy," she announced loudly. "You documented using 47 milliliters, but 50 were checked out to your station. The 3 milliliter difference was waste product from initial calibration. It's documented in my process notes, Section 4, subsection B. Your process notes are incomplete. Industry standard requires waste documentation in the primary log, not buried in subsections." "That's not accurate," Michael said quietly, his voice carrying just enough edge to make colleagues look up. "The protocol manual clearly states waste documentation can be recorded in either location, provided it's cross-referenced appropriately." The lab fell silent. In 3 weeks of systematic harassment, no one had seen Michael directly contradict Amanda's assertions. "Are you telling me I don't know my own laboratory's protocols?" Michael met her eyes with steady gaze of someone who had faced down actual authority figures where stakes were measured in lives. "I'm telling you what the protocol manual says." Amanda's smile was cold enough to freeze fluorescent lighting. "Since you're so confident in your understanding, perhaps you'd be interested in reviewing them more thoroughly. I'll be conducting comprehensive audit of your work over the past month. Every procedure, every decision will be examined in detail." Michael's hands went very still, the kind of stillness that preceded either surrender or violence. Something flickered behind his eyes, shadow of the man who had once made split-second decisions under enemy fire. The weekend brought no relief. Sophie sensed the change in him with supernatural perception, moving through their apartment with careful steps, afraid too much noise might shatter whatever fragile control kept her father functional. "Daddy, are you going to be okay?" she asked Saturday morning. "I'm always okay when I'm with you, sweetheart," he said, settling beside her and smoothing the cowlick. "Are you worried about something?" "You feel different, like when you have the dreams, but you're awake." The accuracy of her observation tightened his chest. "Sometimes grown-ups have to deal with difficult people, but nothing is more important than making sure you're safe and happy." Sophie nodded, then pulled out a drawing from her backpack. A man in a lab coat, standing next to a smaller figure, both rendered in bright, bold colors. "I made this for you. It's you and me at your work. I thought maybe if you had it with you, the difficult people might be nicer." Michael stared at the drawing, throat tightening with emotions he couldn't name. "This is beautiful, baby girl. I'll keep it with me always." Monday morning, Michael placed Sophie's drawing in his desk drawer next to the Bronze Star Medal, 2 talismans representing different men he had been and was trying to become. The lab felt charged with undercurrent of tension. Amanda moved through the space with predatory confidence, eyes bright with anticipation as she surveyed her domain. "Good morning, team," she announced during daily briefing, voice carrying false cheer. "We have exciting changes coming. I'll be implementing enhanced oversight protocols for all senior technicians." Her gaze found Michael across the room. "These new protocols will require more detailed documentation, frequent performance reviews, and closer supervision. I'm confident this increased attention will help us identify any inconsistencies in our current processes." The new protocols began immediately. Every procedure Michael performed was subject to real-time oversight, with Amanda appearing at his shoulder to question decisions that had been routine for 3 years. "Thompson, this calibration sequence shows 30-second deviation from optimal timing," Amanda announced one afternoon, voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Can you explain why you chose to deviate from established protocol?" The deviation was necessary to account for ambient temperature fluctuations. The equipment manual specifically recommends timing adjustments under current conditions. "And you felt qualified to make that determination without consulting supervision?" Michael understood the game. Every response would be used as evidence against him. Every justified decision reframed as insubordination. "I followed established protocol as documented in the equipment manual. In the future, I'd prefer all deviations be cleared through me first. We can't have technicians making independent decisions that might compromise results. The harassment reached new sophistication over following days. Amanda scheduled mandatory overtime during Sophie's therapy appointments, then expressed concern about Michael's inability to prioritize professional obligations. Every interaction was crafted to maximize humiliation while maintaining facade of managerial oversight. Single parents face unique challenges in maintaining career momentum, she said during particularly vicious performance review, words chosen with surgical precision. Perhaps we should discuss whether your current role is the best fit for your circumstances. The breaking point approached like distant thunder, inevitable and terrible in its promise of destruction. Michael could feel it building in the careful stillness of his hands, in shallow, controlled breathing, in military bearing that straightened his spine with each assault. Sophie's drawing remained in his desk drawer next to the Bronze Star medal. 2 pieces of identity Amanda Pierce was about to discover represented far more than she could understand. The day of reckoning arrived on Friday afternoon with deceptive calm that often preceded violent storms. The lab was busy with monthly safety meeting drawing staff from multiple departments. Nearly 20 people gathered around Amanda Pierce, who stood at center of attention like a general addressing troops. "Before we begin today's safety briefing," Amanda announced, voice carrying artificial brightness everyone had learned to associate with incoming cruelty, "I'd like to address some concerns regarding documentation protocols." Michael worked quietly at his station, making final adjustments to complex analysis. His movements were economical and precise, each action flowing with efficiency that came from years of high-pressure practice. "As you know, proper documentation is the foundation of everything we do," Amanda continued, moving through gathered staff with predatory grace. "When procedures aren't followed exactly, when shortcuts are taken, when personnel decide rules don't apply to them, the integrity of our entire operation is compromised." Her path brought her inexorably toward Michael's workstation. He felt familiar, tightening in shoulders that came with incoming fire. The Bronze Star seemed to pulse in his drawer like a heartbeat. "Which brings me to a situation requiring immediate attention," Amanda said, stopping beside Michael's chair. "Mr. Thompson, would you mind joining us?" Michael looked up, meeting her eyes with steady gaze of someone who had faced actual authority figures where stakes were measured in lives. "Of course," he said quietly, setting down instruments with careful precision. "Thank you. Now, as I was saying, documentation protocols exist for a reason. When someone takes it upon themselves to personalize their workspace in ways that violate company policy, it creates precedent that undermines professional standards." Michael felt something cold settle in his chest as Amanda reached toward his desk drawer. The same icy calm that had descended during firefights when time slowed, and every detail became crystal clear. "Well, well," Amanda said, false surprise in her voice as she pulled open the drawer. "What do we have here?" Her first discovery was Sophie's drawing, bright colors looking fragile in her predatory grasp. She held it up for everyone to see, expression mixing mockery and triumph. "Haha, how touching. A little girl's fantasy about her daddy being some kind of hero." She turned the drawing so everyone could see Sophie's rendering of her father as tall, strong figure in lab coat, innocent pride in every crayon stroke now exposed to public ridicule. Michael's breathing became shallow and controlled. The same pattern he'd used in combat when staying calm meant difference between life and death. Around the lab, colleagues shifted uncomfortably, recognizing cruelty, but unsure how to intervene. But Amanda wasn't finished. Her hand delved deeper, emerging with the Bronze Star medal that Michael had hoped never to display again. The metal caught fluorescent lighting as she examined it with clinical interest. "And what's this? Playing dress-up soldier, are we, Thompson? Let me guess, You bought this at a surplus store to impress people with your imaginary military service? The words hit the room like physical blow, stunning everyone into absolute silence. Michael went perfectly still, not stillness of submission, but dangerous quiet of trained soldier who had just watched an enemy cross a line from which there could be no retreat. Actually, Amanda continued, warming to her theme, this explains so much about your attitude problem. All this time I thought I was dealing with insubordinate employee, but it turns out I'm dealing with someone who thinks his fantasy military service makes him special. Michael's hands began to shake. Not from fear, but from enormous effort required to maintain control as something primal stirred in depths of his consciousness. The bronze star represented more than personal recognition. It was symbol of 3 soldiers who had gone home to their families, because he had been willing to risk everything. You know what the really sad part is? Amanda's voice took on cruel edge of someone enjoying destruction. This poor little girl actually believes her daddy is some kind of hero, when reality is he's just another washed-up wannabe who couldn't cut it in the real world. The sound of paper tearing cut through silence like a scream. Michael watched in frozen horror as Amanda casually ripped Sophie's drawing in half, bright colors separating a long jagged line that seemed to tear something vital inside his chest. Maybe, Amanda said, dropping pieces to floor with theatrical contempt. It's time someone taught this little girl the truth about her loser father. The last shred of Michael's control snapped like overstressed cable. That's enough. The words came out quiet and level, but carried the kind of authority that made everyone freeze in recognition of imminent danger. Amanda turned toward him, with triumph blazing in her eyes, perhaps thinking she had finally provoked the breakdown she'd worked toward for weeks. But what she saw in Michael's face made her take involuntary step backward, not helpless rage of defeated employee, but cold, calculating assessment of someone trained to neutralize threats with surgical precision. "Excuse me?" she said, but her voice had lost predatory confidence. Michael rose from his chair with fluid economy of motion, movements carrying unconscious grace of someone trained to function under extreme pressure. The change in his bearing was subtle, but unmistakable. Shoulders back, spine straight, eyes focused with intensity that came from years of life and death decisions. I said, "That's enough." His voice remained quiet, but carried unmistakable authority of someone who had commanded respect in situations where failure meant people died. Amanda's face flushed with anger at what she perceived as direct insubordination. "How dare you speak to me that way? You're nothing but a pathetic has-been who can't even—" Her words cut off as her hand shot out to grab Michael's collar, fingers closing around fabric with aggressive confidence from 3 weeks of unopposed psychological warfare. "You're finished here, Thompson. I'm going to destroy you so completely that no one will ever hire you again." The moment her hand made contact, everything changed. Michael's body went completely still for exactly 1 heartbeat, the kind of stillness that preceded either surrender or violence. Then his training took over, muscle memory executing movements he'd hoped never to use again. His right hand moved with surgical precision, closing over Amanda's wrist in a grip that immediately communicated difference between civilian strength and military conditioning. "Remove your hand," he said quietly, voice carrying calm authority he'd once used to give orders under mortar fire. Amanda's eyes widened as she felt controlled power in his grip, the way her wrist was immobilized without visible effort. For the first time in 3 weeks, she was experiencing helplessness. "Let go of me!" she hissed, trying to pull away and discovering she might as well have been trying to move a mountain. "Remove your hand," Michael repeated, each word precise and deliberate. Around them, the lab had gone dead silent, 20 pairs of eyes fixed on confrontation with horrified fascination. Amanda's free hand came up in what might have been intended as a slap, but Michael's left hand intercepted it with effortless efficiency, catching her wrist in matching grip. For a moment they stood frozen, Amanda trapped by her own aggression, Michael demonstrating restraint that spoke of training far beyond anything a laboratory technician should possess. "That's fascinating," came a new voice from the doorway. Dr. James Rodriguez, the facility's research director, stood in the entrance with expression of someone who had just solved a puzzle that had been bothering him for months. Everyone turned toward the newcomer, but Michael's grip never wavered, attention remaining focused on Amanda with single-minded intensity of someone who had learned never to take eyes off a threat until it was neutralized. "Dr. Rodriguez," Amanda managed, voice strained. "This man just assaulted me. I want him arrested immediately." Dr. Rodriguez walked slowly into the lab, eyes never leaving Michael's face. There was something in his expression, recognition, perhaps, or careful assessment of someone encountering old acquaintance in unexpected circumstances. "Assaulted you?" Dr. Rodriguez repeated, tone suggesting genuine curiosity. "From where I'm standing, it looks like you grabbed him first, and he's simply restraining you from continuing." He paused, studying Michael with intensity of someone confirming long-held suspicion. "Tell me, Ms. Pierce, do you know who you just put your hands on?" Amanda's face went through several color changes as she processed implications. "I don't care who he thinks he is. He's just a laboratory technician, and he committed assault on a superior." Dr. Rodriguez's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Actually, Ms. Pierce, you just assaulted Dr. Michael Thompson, former combat medic with the Army's 75th Ranger Regiment, recipient of the Bronze Star Medal for Valor Under Fire, and the man who performed emergency surgery on my nephew while under enemy attack in Kandahar province." The words hit like physical shock wave. Around the lab, people who had worked alongside Michael for 3 years suddenly saw him with completely different eyes. Not quiet, unassuming technician, but decorated combat veteran whose silence had hidden depths they'd never suspected. "That's impossible," Amanda said, face pale. "He never said anything about military service. Dr. Thompson has a peculiar habit of not discussing his past." Dr. Rodriguez replied, voice carrying warmth that suggested genuine respect. "Probably because he's spent 3 years trying to build quiet life for himself and his daughter, away from attention that comes with being genuine war hero." Michael's grip remained steady, but something had shifted in his expression. Not weakness, but exhausted recognition that his carefully constructed anonymity had just been shattered beyond repair. "Let me tell you about Dr. Thompson," Dr. Rodriguez continued, voice carrying authority of someone who had earned right to speak with absolute certainty. 3 years ago in Afghanistan, an IED disabled his unit's convoy, while wounded himself, fractured shoulder blade, perforated eardrum, severe lacerations. He crawled into burning Humvee to extract 3 trapped soldiers. The lab had become cathedral of silence, everyone straining to hear details that recontextualized everything they thought they knew. But that's not the impressive part. The impressive part is that one soldier had severed artery, and Dr. Thompson performed emergency surgery using field kit while vehicle was still burning around them, under enemy fire, with one functional arm. Amanda struggled to free herself, but her movements had lost aggressive confidence. "I don't care what he did overseas. That doesn't give him the right to—" "You're absolutely correct," Michael said quietly, voice cutting through her protests with surgical precision. "My past doesn't give me special rights, but it does give me perspective on what real authority looks like and what actual threats feel like." He released her wrists with same controlled precision he'd used to restrain them, stepping back just far enough to create space while maintaining readiness for renewed aggression. "You've spent 3 weeks trying to destroy my career, attacking my competence, questioning my character, and threatening my ability to provide for my daughter. But today you made a mistake. Today you attacked the memory of my wife, and you destroyed something my daughter made because she wanted to help her daddy feel better at work." Amanda rubbed her wrists, expression cycling through anger, embarrassment, and something that might have been fear, as she began to understand magnitude of her miscalculation. "I've spent 3 years being exactly what you see. Quiet, competent technician who does his job and goes home to his family," Michael said, voice carrying weight of absolute conviction. "I chose this life because I wanted something peaceful for Sophie, something stable where she could feel safe." He gestured toward torn pieces of drawing scattered on floor, jaw tightening with controlled emotion. "But you decided that wasn't enough. You decided to turn my workplace into battlefield, to use my love for my daughter as weapon against me." The silence stretched like live wire, charged with potential for violence everyone could feel, but no one quite understood. Michael's bearing had completed its transformation. No longer quiet lab technician, but decorated combat veteran whose silence had been mistaken for weakness. "I want you to understand something," he said, voice dropping to barely above whisper, but carrying clearly through absolute quiet. "I've protected my brothers in arms with my life. I've held dying soldiers and fought to save them when there was no hope left. I've seen what real evil looks like, and I've faced it down without flinching." He took single step closer to Amanda, not threatening but positioning himself with unconscious precision of someone who understood geometry of confrontation. "Today, you crossed a line that has nothing to do with corporate policy. Today, you attacked my family. And I want you to understand, with absolute clarity, that there is no force on earth more dangerous than a father protecting his child." Amanda opened her mouth to respond, but no sound came. Something in Michael's eyes, not anger, but cold, implacable determination, had finally communicated reality of her situation. "Dr. Thompson," Dr. Rodriguez said quietly, voice carrying both respect and concern, "I think we've established the point." Michael's eyes never left Amanda's face, but he nodded once, sharp acknowledgement of boundaries that still mattered. Amanda Pierce was escorted from the building 30 minutes later, her termination processed with efficiency, typically reserved for security threats. Her career in pharmaceutical research ended that afternoon, word of her conduct spreading through professional networks with viral speed that characterized stories of spectacular professional self-destruction. Michael stood at his workstation, carefully collecting torn pieces of Sophie's drawing with hands that were finally steady again. The Bronze Star Medal lay on his desk in full view for the first time in 3 years, metal surface reflecting fluorescent lighting like beacon that could no longer be hidden. The transformation was complete, not just in how others saw him, but in how he saw himself. The quiet lab technician who had tried to disappear into anonymity was gone, replaced by decorated combat veteran who had been hiding beneath layers of carefully constructed normalcy. As he placed torn pieces of Sophie's drawing in his pocket, Michael felt weight of recognition settling around his shoulders like armor he'd hoped never to wear again. The war had found him, even in sterile corridors of research laboratory, and he had emerged victorious but forever changed. 6 months later, MedTech Solutions had settled into new rhythm that felt both familiar and fundamentally transformed. Michael's promotion to senior research coordinator had come with unexpected benefits beyond obvious salary increase. The enhanced schedule flexibility allowed him to attend every one of Sophie's therapy appointments, to be present for small victories and gentle setbacks. More importantly, the respect of his colleagues had evolved from careful deference typically shown to war heroes into something more valuable, genuine appreciation of people who worked beside him every day and understood that his competence came from present dedication to excellence. "Dr. Thompson!" Jessica Walsh approached his office carrying tablet loaded with data from their latest research initiative. The preliminary results from the vaccine efficacy study are remarkable. Michael looked up from budget projections, reading glasses catching afternoon light streaming through his window. The view gave him clear sight line to parking lot where Sophie would emerge from after-school program in exactly 47 minutes. "Show me what you've found," he said, gesturing for Jessica to take the chair across from his desk. As Jessica walked him through data, Michael felt familiar satisfaction that came from work that mattered beyond quarterly reports. The vaccine they were developing could potentially prevent a strain of pneumonia that killed thousands of children annually. The kind of mission that gave meaning to long hours and meticulous documentation. The efficacy rates are holding steady at 94% across all test populations, Jessica explained, excitement barely contained. If these results hold through final trials, we could be looking at FDA approval within 18 months. Michael studied numbers with critical eye of someone who had learned not to trust initial optimism until verified through rigorous testing. But even his natural caution couldn't diminish significance of what they were seeing. Results that suggested their work might save lives on scale that rivaled anything he'd accomplished as combat medic. "This is excellent work, Jess. Let's schedule presentation for Dr. Rodriguez next week." That evening, as they settled into familiar routine of homework and dinner, Sophie surprised him with new drawing she'd completed during art class. This one showed man in lab coat standing beside microscope, but unlike her previous artwork, this figure stood tall and confident, surrounded by children looking through scientific instruments with expressions of wonder. "It's you teaching my class," she explained as Michael studied careful details. "I wanted to show how you help people learn important things." Michael placed the drawing on refrigerator next to her other artwork, but this one felt different. Not just child's interpretation of father's work, but reflection of someone who had begun to understand that heroism came in many forms, all valuable, all worthy of respect. The Bronze Star Medal caught kitchen light as he moved through evening routine, no longer source of complicated shame, but reminder that qualities that had made him effective under fire, precision, courage, dedication to protecting others, were same qualities that made him effective in laboratory and as father. The future stretched ahead with possibility rather than anxiety, and for the first time since Rachel's death, Michael felt ready to meet it with open hands instead of closed fists, secure in knowledge that Sophie would grow up understanding that strength and intelligence weren't opposing forces but complementary aspects of same commitment to making world better. The storm that had seemed so destructive had cleared air for something better, something more honest, something worthy of little girl who looked at him with absolute trust and saw not broken veteran hiding from his past, but hero who had simply found new way to serve.